All right, so this week we are going over narrative essay writing. So remember, when we do this, we are going to be making an argument. It is very easy with this type of essay to try and just go into more of a creative writing um, and forget that we are writing for a purpose, which is to convince someone of something, whatever it is that you decide to convince me of or whoever. Um, so we're going to be arguing a lesson through a story. So to start off with, what is narrative writing? It's using a story to make a point. According to our textbook, you can use narrative arguments to discuss your experience or describe a historical or current event to share your values and explain how you look at the world. And your audience will weigh your stories, events, and characters against their own experiences. So we are trying to show through a story or personal experience something that promotes or proves your point, whatever your point may be. And don't worry, we have plenty of examples. All right, so when do we want to use narrative writing? It is good when you want to recap and explain the significance of an historical event, current event, or trend, again, with the purpose of convincing someone of your point of view, to explain how a specific concept, ideal, belief, or law came to be, to prove an example of why a specific argument is true or accurate, and you can also use it to teach or explain a concept or a lesson. And I don't know if you can hear that, but someone in my neighborhood is setting off fireworks. Oh well. So these are the most common reasons you would choose to write a narrative essay when making an argument. So what makes narrative essay writing different from fiction or creative writing? Because remember, like I just said, it is very different. Narrative essays need to have a point, which I know a lot of you that might like to read a lot say, oh, well, most novels have a point. I'm gonna talk about this in a moment, but this all comes back to you have to be very explicit and tell your reader exactly what your point is. You cannot assume that they'll figure it out on their own because they might come to a different assumption than you. So narrative essays are factual narratives. So we're not making it up. It's not creative writing in that we're not creating a completely out of this world story to prove a point. It has to be factual. Your story needs to prove something or provide a lesson. So that's where your argument or you're convincing me of something comes into play. In creative writing, the author does not always explicitly state the point. As I just said, it is often left to the reader's interpretation. You never want to rely in argumentative writing on the reader's interpretation of your point, because again, they could see something completely different than you and read your story and take it in a completely different context in order to prove their own belief, which might be the complete opposite of yours. And then in narrative essay writing, you need to be explicit. Be very specific, even more so, I would say, than any other type of essay we've written so far. You really need to be very explicit in what your point is to make it clear for the audience. Try not to cough in your ears. Did it not? There we go. Okay, so here's a breakdown of how your essay should be structured. This is basically your outline right here, and it should be written exactly like this to be a successful narrative essay. So we're going to start with your intro, which will be setting the scene. So you want to introduce where, what, and who. Then your 3 body paragraphs come next. So the first one should be introduce your complication. So what do the characters need to do? What is the problem they face? What happened? Excuse me. Next is evaluate the complication. So what do the characters think can resolve the situation and what do they want to do? So again, we're not actually resolving the complication in this paragraph. We are just explaining what the evaluation of the complication is before we actually make a decision. And then resolve the complication. So how is the problem solved? This is where we're going to take what we discussed in the previous paragraph and actually put it into action or show how we put it into action. And then your conclusion paragraph should be explaining the meaning. So this is where you're going to, if you haven't already, beat your audience over the head with what is the point of this. Explain what the narrative means and why you wrote about it. Okay, so here we have that same exact outline again, but with an example. So in this example of a paper, we have setting the scene, our intro. Me and my friends are going camping. There is a trail that is blocked, but we go down it anyway and set up camp. So now I know who is involved, myself and my friends. I know what we're doing. We're camping. We're out in the woods. We saw a sign that says, don't go past the sign, and we did it anyway because whatever. First paragraph, introduction of the complication. Sitting around a fire that night, we hear noises in the woods, and they're getting louder. So there's my complication. Evaluate the complication. We think about ignoring them, the noises we hear. Things are just louder because it's so quiet. That's completely normal when you're out in the woods, far away from everything. It could be an animal or the wind. So we decide to investigate the noise. So resolve the complication that comes next. We find a bear. We run out of the woods, leaving everything behind. And then again, last paragraph is explain the meaning. Well, we should not ignore signs. So that's my point. That is what I'm trying to convey to my readers. I'm trying to convince you that if there's a sign posted somewhere saying don't go past this point or danger or something like that, you should not ignore signs. You should actually follow them. They're there for a reason. Okay, so what do we need to remember? Because this is a personal story, we need to make sure we stay focused. It is easy to get sidetracked. So I know a few of you with the last paper found yourselves going off on tangents like we talked about in class, but make sure you do not do this with your narrative. Again, this is even easier than with the last paper to go off on tangents with a narrative essay. Make sure everything you explain and everything you talk about is directly related to your purpose. It may be great to talk about for that whole entire paragraph about sitting around the campfire talking about s'mores, but how is talking about s'mores and how great they are going to tell me, like, support my argument that we should follow signs? It doesn't. Only discuss people, events, and background that are necessary to understand the narrative. So again, s'mores aren't going to help you understand the narrative in the context of do what signs say. A reader does not need to know what your friend's favorite color is, for example, and that he plays a guitar in a story about him teaching you how to drive a manual transmission car. Those things have nothing to do with it. It might be interesting facts about your friend, but not going to help in learning how to drive a car. The next one, let's see if I can move my face here. There we go. That might work better. A reader does not need to know how you seasoned your steak for dinner on the night of your story took place, or that during an important conversation in your narrative, you got a text from your mom asking you if you're still planning on coming over on Saturday. Again, those things have nothing to do with the actual argument you're making. All right, second thing to keep in mind, you want to write in chronological order. Again, this is much different than in creative writing. You do not, in creative writing, a lot of times you want to do things slightly out of order for whatever reason. In a narrative, argumentative essay, you do not want to do that. It'll just confuse the issue, and the point isn't to get the audience to figure out what's going on. It should be very clear what's going on. What they need to figure out is what your argument is and if they agree with you or not. So to present everything in the order that it happened, make sure anything a reader needs to know to understand events is presented before they happen. And unlike speaking, writing always, writing allows you to go back. So if a reader missed something, they can go back and look at it. But make sure that you put necessary information first before it's needed to understand what you say. Readers are smart enough to know that if they're like, oh, I didn't understand that, I must have missed something, and they can go back, because that makes sense in an argumentative essay to put it details and then explanation of why it's important. Third thing to remember is to be descriptive. So we've talked about this a little bit with the last paper, and we're going to do it again with this one. A reader should be able to picture your narrative. Make sure you use lots of descriptive words. Use the 5 senses as much as you can. This includes the characters and the setting, and you want to make sure you are keeping your reader interested. If they feel like this is a long-winded story that isn't going anywhere, they're probably just going to stop reading. All right, and the last point to keep in mind when we're writing narrative essays is to have a point. So it's easy to get caught up in telling an interesting story and forget that there needs to be a purpose or argument. Said this a couple times already, but it definitely needs to be resaid. Do not go on tangents, and make sure that it's very clear what your point is. Otherwise, when your audience finishes your paper, they may think, oh, it was a great story, but that hasn't changed my view or made me think anything different about any kind of, opinion you might have on that, whatever topic it is. So yeah, just make sure it's a very clear point.